and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of X's and O's. I'm Joe Thompson along with Isak Dinesen. We got a lot of sports to cover today. We're going to talk about the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Later on in the show, we'll discuss the first couple weeks of Major League Baseball, and we'll talk about the AAF a little bit. But first, we're going to give you a brief recap of the Elite Eight action and then a brief summary of what we think of the Final Four matchups. So, Isaac, starting with the Duke-Michigan State game, what really went on in that game? Duke losing by 1.
So that was the last game of the Elite Eight, and it was a really, really great game. It was right down to the wire. It's pretty much mostly everything you could anticipate for in a clash between two blue bloods of college basketball, but ultimately this game really came down to just a couple, I think I narrowed it down to 3 main things that happened in this game. It was basically Duke becoming pretty much just a 2-man scoring effort and not much else. It was Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett that had 24 and 21 points, and Duke turned it over 17 times. That's not good if you want to win games, especially since your opponent turned it over much less than you did. And then also just Michigan State, they've continued to prove how together they've grown as a team throughout the course of this tournament. As Cassius Winston's really stepped up his play, he had 22 points and 10 assists in the Duke win. Xavier Tillman, Kenny Goins hit the go-ahead shot against Duke. Michigan State's a very sound team, a very solid team, and they proved that against Duke. And also Duke, I guess another point just to throw on here that I didn't write down, Duke ultimately lost this game, didn't give themselves a chance to win because they played defense without fouling for much of the second half. It really killed them in the end when they only had about 3 team fouls and they had an opportunity to foul Michigan State and extend the game, but Michigan State wasn't in the bonus, and Michigan State couldn't shoot free throws, and eventually they were able to just run away from the Duke defense and win the game.
How much momentum do you think this gives Michigan State going into the Final Four?
Probably a lot. They're going to be playing in familiar territory in Minnesota, in Minneapolis to be exact, although not the same building that they're used to playing in. Definitely a much larger stage and a different team that they're used to playing when they go to Minnesota, however. But anyway, I think this is a good win, obviously, for that purpose as well, just considering that not many people were giving Michigan State, maybe other than Spartan fans, were giving Michigan State a chance to get to the Final Four, considering they're in that East region. They're playing. They have to go through Duke more than likely to get to Minneapolis, and they were able to overcome all that. They had the PR thing with Tom Izzo yelling at one of his players, one of his freshmen. They managed to get through that and just say that that's really not, that's a non-issue for us, and they managed to survive and get into the Final Four. Big win for them.
Yeah. Back to Duke really quick. They had the top 3 prospects coming out of college last year on their team with Zion Williamson, Cam Reddish, and RJ Barrett. Even with those 3 spectacular players, they didn't even make the Final Four. Do you think that has some sort of impact on the team and the program going forward?
Well, they're still getting great players every year. It's just unfortunate that those players had to be at the center of this loss. It's just unfortunate for all the Duke fans out there. There may be few, even though there are a lot of reasons to like Duke considering the play of Zion Williamson this tournament. But nonetheless, Duke's still a great program. They still continue to get 5-star athletes up the wazoo every single year. It's just a matter of, at this point, can they, finish the job? And unfortunately, this year, it was just one of those years where they just couldn't, despite having great talents like Williamson and RJ Barrett on the team. And Cam Reddish was ultimately one of the main reasons also that they ended up falling off as well down the stretch. And they really just played teams way too close as well. Yeah. It's just unfortunate in that sense. They had to keep surviving.
Yeah,
had to keep surviving.
Should have lost against UCF.
Right, and also Virginia Tech had an opportunity right at the rim. It was a little lob pass, and the ball just drifted off to the left a little bit. Just 2 tough games, like very difficult situation for Duke, having to continue to beat teams by a little bit, and ultimately those games can ultimately roll the other way.
Yeah. So I want to talk quickly about the Texas Tech versus Gonzaga game. That was a game that kind of surprised me. I didn't think Texas Tech really had a chance against Gonzaga because Gonzaga has such a talented roster. They were one of the best teams. They were ranked #1 for a good portion of the season in the AP poll. But when you look at the stats, Texas Tech shot better than Gonzaga in every category pretty much.
Texas Tech's got a great defense.
43%, almost 44% from the field, 39% from 3. Only missed 3 free throws out of the 19 they shot. They also forced more turnovers. Then Gonzaga they didn't have as many turnovers as Gonzaga did, and they also didn't have as many fouls. So looking at the stats, you could really see how using Texas Tech with their defense, as you said, they were really nice. They were able to lock down Gonzaga in a way that most teams haven't been able to do all year. Gonzaga had only lost 4 games going into that game, so it was really impressive to see how Texas Tech was able to go through and just really upset Gonzaga.
And if you were thinking that this performance against Gonzaga was impressive, you might not have been watching that Texas Tech-Michigan game earlier in the tournament when Michigan, a very, very good offensive team in their own right, they only scored 44 points.
Which is insane. That Michigan team.
And Michigan lost by 19 to this team, so
yeah,
it's going to be a tough draw for Michigan State when they get Texas Tech.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about the other Elite Eight game, Virginia and Purdue. Carson Edwards had 42 points, more than half of Purdue's points. How was he able to produce against such a talented roster in Virginia?
He's just very talented, bar none. He just kept making these ridiculous shots. He was outstanding from the three-point line as well. But what really didn't help Purdue in this game, you need other guys to step up. And ultimately, those moments where guys other than number 3 in black for the Boilermakers, it just never came. Ryan Klein was dynamite against Tennessee in that overtime thriller in the previous round. And he only had 7 points in the game. He could never really get going. It turned out to be his last game as a Boilermaker. But just from really a foundation standpoint, you know, give a ton of credit to Matt Painter and Purdue for hanging around against one of the best teams in the country like they did, having to play like they did, just pretty much playing hero ball with Carson Edwards for pretty much the entire game. But still, I really like their roster base that they have. It's just a question of whether Carson Edwards is going to declare for the NBA draft as he was a junior, I believe, this year.
Virginia themselves as a team has been notorious since they became really one of the top college basketball programs in the country.
Like we mentioned.
They have been notorious for not meeting expectations in the NCAA tournament. Specifically last year, losing in the first round to a 16 seed, UMBC, first time that had ever happened in the men's tournament. What was the difference between this year and previous years?
They're just more locked in, really, on both sides of the ball. I mean, the guys that, you know, they leaned on before, or at least throughout the entire season, they've continued to step up, and they were rewarded recently for their complete effort as a team. They had 2 guys named to the All-AP, All-American third team. I believe they were DeAndre Hunter and Kyle Guy. They've both been fantastic in this tournament, but really just Virginia is very fundamentally sound on both sides of the ball. They really remind me a lot of what Villanova prided themselves on last year, which is why I kind of thought that Villanova was going to go far this year just because of their tradition of being, you know, really good at a few things, exceptionally good at a few things. That's what Virginia is. They can shoot the ball really well. They play great fundamental defense. They rebound well. It's just they've just continued to answer the call, and that's what they've been looking for. They just really need to prove those national pundits and prove to those national pundits that they can really take control of their own destiny, because considering they're the highest seed remaining in the tournament, they need to be able to win the big game in order to truly prove themselves on a national stage. Yeah,
and then moving into the last game of the Elite Eight, Auburn versus Kentucky, another game like Purdue-Virginia game, went to overtime, which Auburn ultimately ended up winning their first ever Final Four appearance. Even when they had Charles Barkley, they didn't make the Final Four, which is kind of crazy to me because Charles Barkley was the best basketball player they've ever had. But looking ahead at the stats, Kentucky really shot, for the most part, better from the floor than Auburn, but Auburn only shot 30% from 3 in comparison to 23.8%. Auburn 7 of 23 from three-point range. Kentucky 5 of 21. Looking at like total points scored, Jared Harper and Bryce Brown each had 20
Very good
20
players for Auburn right there. They were dynamite in that game.
Jared Harper himself had 5 assists and 5 boards in 39 minutes to go, along with his 26 points. And then for Kentucky, one of the things, P.J. Washington, one of their best players, finished with a double-double, 28 points, 13 rebounds. Thing that really caught my eye when looking at the final tallies, Reed Travis, Minnesota guy from Minnesota,
De La Salle,
transfer from Stanford, played 44 minutes, barely took a break, had 9 points. He was one of their higher caliber players. He was one of the veteran leaders on this team. It was really just kind of disappointing to see like such a talented player just not show up when it really matters most. I think that's one of the biggest things you have to look at. It's just kind of disappointing. But looking ahead to the Final Four matchups, we got Michigan State versus Texas Tech, Auburn versus Virginia. Who do you think has the advantage going into those games?
The Michigan State-Texas Tech game is probably going to be the best game of the two on Saturday. Well, that's difficult, really, to determine who's going to come out because Texas Tech, they're on such a high after beating a #1 seed. And at the same time, so is Michigan State. They're both, I think they both kind of clash in play styles. Although I really have liked Texas Tech's athletes throughout throughout the season and going back to last year even as well. I mean, they won the Big 12 regular season title from Kansas. They stole that from Kansas, which hadn't happened in like a decade and a half, I'm pretty sure. Texas Tech is no joke. They're a great defensive team. They also have a South Dakota transfer, Matt Mooney, on their team, and he was one of the leaders in points for them the other day in their last game against Gonzaga. So it's going to be a tough draw, I think, in that game specifically, but otherwise on the other side with the Auburn-Virginia game, I think maybe Virginia might just have more talent than Auburn, but it doesn't matter ultimately who has more talent, as we were proven in that Michigan State-Duke game as well. It's just a matter of who can execute the best. I like Auburn's game style, but I think Virginia's is too fundamentally sound. I would think maybe Virginia has the advantage in that matchup.
We'll have to see what happens this weekend between those four great teams.
And the national championship game's on Monday, and hopefully we'll have a show for you to cover that game. Given we haven't done Monday shows in quite a bit, we'll see what happens, but count on that ideally on Monday.
Well, you're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk some Major League Baseball and the ultimate upcoming demise of the AAF.
Possibly.
We'll be right back.
The TLMC offers a variety of services for NDSU students and instructors. Class project support is one of the key ways in which the TLMC serves faculty. Technology-intensive projects can provide students with an opportunity for creative expression, enhanced communication, and the development of digital media literacy skills that will benefit them in class, college, and beyond. We realize that there are obstacles and challenges to assigning technology-rich projects, and the TLMC is here to help by serving as a bridge between instructors, students, and the technology. We can help with project planning, identifying student learning and support needs, and developing, coordinating, and delivering project-specific support. Our services include hands-on workshops for your students, scheduled during or outside of class time. Individual and group assistance is always available for students on a walk-in basis at the TLMC lab. With access to a variety of multimedia software and hardware, students can store and work on their audio-video projects over time. Workstations may be reserved or used on a walk-in basis. Other learning resources include project-specific learning links on the TLMC website, our learning resource library, and a lynda.com learning kiosk. The TLMC Media Studio features space and equipment for video recording, studio photography, audio recording, and screen capture. Students, faculty, and staff can make appointments to use the studio and to get help in producing, editing, and publishing their media works. Additional studio resources are also available at Berry Hall. Please contact us if you would like to take a tour of our facilities or visit with us about a project that you have in mind.
Welcome back to X's and O's, where we're going to go ahead and move on to what's been happening in the first couple of weeks of Major League Baseball. Bryce Harper recently made the trip back to Washington, D.C., his former home, now as a Philadelphia Philly. He played pretty well last night, despite striking out his first two at-bats. What did you think of his return?
Well, I think what we're going to be leading into eventually is what happened after those first two strikeouts. Just let's not beat around the bush. That third at bat that he had back in D.C., he gets a pitch over the middle of the plate, and he just absolutely destroys it, and then rubs it completely in the D.C. fans' noses with it with an amazing bat flip.
One of the best bat flips I've ever seen.
Yeah,
probably since the Jose Bautista.
So that clearly shows our opinions on it. Obviously, not everybody likes that, but I don't know. I think from our perspective, I think we can both agree at least on. Hopefully, maybe we are not encouraging you, obviously, to have the same opinion as us at home on these topics, but still, at least, I would hope that you can understand our perspectives. Like, considering the fact that there's so much emotion involved in this return, and to get an opportunity like that after striking out, after Harper struck out the first couple times he came to the plate.
The DC fans are just rattling him after those two strikeouts.
When he got a chance to make a quality swing on a pitch, he didn't miss it and just destroyed it. And then he later had another RBI double as well. So it was a very successful return to DC last night for many reasons, and is definitely provided for some quality entertainment.
There was also some quality entertainment within the first week. Paul Goldschmidt hit 3 home runs in one game. Christian Yelich against the Cardinals, that Paul Goldschmidt is the team that he's on. He hit 4 home runs in 4 games. Really great stuff. And the Minnesota Twins themselves are 4-1.
As of this recording, they just won earlier today. Yep.
So it's been really entertaining to see baseball back. You and I both we're pretty big baseball fans. But it's like, do you think it's going to they're going to keep this like entertaining swing going? Or is it just going to come back to, you'd hope it would be as entertaining as it is, but who knows? It gets tough to watch 162 games.
Yeah.
You don't.
I mean, there are a select few that are completely dedicated and have the time
to you guys.
to watch all 162 games of a season. But nonetheless, still, it's still very nice to get all these games back and get to see these players again compete, knowing that every year is a complete blank slate. We obviously previewed all 30 teams last week, and we gave our general opinions. And right now, I thought that the Minnesota Twins are going to be a surprise team in the AL Central through 5 games at least.
Yeah.
They're proving that theory right so far, but obviously still 157 games for most of these teams.
I want to see them play some other competition. So far, they played the Indians, who are injury-riddled at the moment, and the Royals, who are still in rebuild mode after winning the World Series in 2015. And they are also injured. They lost some of their key players as well.
Salvador Perez,
I want to see them play teams like the Astros, the Red Sox, who aren't off to the greatest start either.
They struggled in Seattle to start the year.
Yeah. Yankees themselves, they lost to Baltimore
They lost
twice,
2 out of 3 to Baltimore. Yeah, that's right.
It's hilarious, which is kind of funny. If you're a baseball fan, you automatically...
And if you watched our show last week, you'll know that the Orioles lost 115 games
One of the worst records in the history of baseball. It's just really funny to see that. Such a team that has World Series aspirations.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's
lose 2 out of 3 to arguably the worst team in the major leagues.
It didn't really get much better this season. So.
I think we'll go ahead and move on to the biggest story happening today as of this recording, or as of yesterday.
Really, this was a big story yesterday.
The AAF, the football league,
the Alliance of American Football,
the Alliance of American Football, the league that goes on when the NFL is not happening.
At least that was the plan.
Has now suspended all football operations.
Yeah.
Really tough to see. They didn't even make it through a full season. Earlier on, this seemed like it could succeed. They had some great teams. Had some well-known players. They had Trent Richardson of the Birmingham Iron. Johnny Manziel joined Just
joined the Memphis team last week, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, had some pretty notable players, although from NFL's past. But what do you ultimately think led to their demise?
I think it was reported that the funding was the biggest issue. That I think the one of the founders of the league just was making the funds like on a week-by-week basis. All this stuff I didn't actually read too much into this. I heard this on a Bison 1660. I was listening to the radio yesterday when this happened. But still, just the fact that all this let the record show that the original XFL failed because of ratings and just bad football. The AAF is not ultimately going to fold, which is it looks like it's going to fold. It's not official yet, but the AAF is not going to fold because of bad football or bad ratings. It's just because they couldn't keep the league funded week to week.
When you compare the two, it's like, yes, the XFL had a full season, but it was just absolute terrible football.
It was not good football. It was not good entertainment
after the first 2
either.
weeks. And then the ratings just tanked, and Vince McMahon lost millions of dollars. When you compare the AAF, it was objective. In my opinion, from what I've seen, I haven't been able to watch a lot of games, but it looked like pretty decent football.
The football was great. I never had a chance to watch the games. I don't have cable. I don't really. I don't indulge in that. But
it's a shame that they had to fold because of funding. It's just really tough to see.
And I mean, the Orlando Apollos, they were the best team in the AAF, and they were, I think, 6-1 or 7-1 at the time or at least as of this week when they made that announcement yesterday. And it seemed like they were pretty much, like with Steve Spurrier at the helm, they were kind of destined to be the league's first champion. They were led by Charles Johnson, former Minnesota Viking wide receiver, one of the best receivers in the league that's got a lot of good receivers. It's just a shame that, teams like that are playing together like that, the good teams at least, that are, still fighting for roster spots in the NFL eventually, but seeing guys like Charles Johnson and Rashad Ross of Arizona and Logan Woodside of San Antonio being able to compete like that, it's unfortunate, and also Marquise Goodwin as well, another San Antonio quarterback who I deemed my team when we initially introduced the AAF. But anyway, still, all these good teams that were fighting for playoff spots, unfortunate for them, but still unfortunate for everybody involved, considering they now don't get more opportunities to get their name out there again and try to impress NFL teams.
But at the same time, according to a podcast that included Vikings general manager Rick Spielman, he hopes that some of those players, as you mentioned, get opportunities to go back and play for the NFL. I would personally like to see Trent Richardson get another shot. He was on my team, the Birmingham Iron. He was one of the he was the touchdown machine on that team. He scored a lot of their points. And seeing the people that you mentioned get an opportunity to at least be on the practice squad of a team.
As long as they're eligible,
if they're eligible, make it to, hopefully, if they're lucky, make it to a full-time roster.
I mean, it's just an unfortunate scene with the AAF being what it is, and don't get us wrong. There are a lot of good players and a lot of good teams and a lot of good coaches. A lot of it really seemed like a great idea. Just so unfortunate that one of the founders of the league just couldn't get the funds in order, and just really, just a real shame. It's a real shame considering what it was trying to be, and also there was a struggle, I believe, with the NFLPA. They really wanted to try to make, it's not official that the AAF was going to be like a direct minor league to the NFL. I think that was the original purpose, but the NFLPA had some pushback on that, because if the league was going to, I think if the league was going to survive beyond this year, they needed to be able to get young players out of college in order to continue to keep going and not just rely on NFL veterans that had fallen out of the league.
Well, I guess we'll have to see what happens, because Vince McMahon is planning on bringing the XFL back, I believe, in 2020.
That's next year,
So we'll have to see what happens with that. It's not going to be what the old XFL was.
It shouldn't be, no.
It really shouldn't be.
Just watch the 30 for 30 documentary on it if you want to know what that was all about.
It was a whole debacle.
Just terrible idea. Terrible. Really bad idea. In every way.
But I think they're actually going to try and make this like a legitimate league with the XFL. They're going to not make it like, we're going to have a two players run for the ball, and whoever
scramble
for the ball. No kickoffs. I think it was one of them.
But anyway, I think with the XFL, I think they were smart in terms of starting up their league. They gave themselves 2 years in advance to start it up, and I think the AAF only had 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. You need to be able to iron out the kinks, I think, in order to get a fully fledged league like this, and you're trying to make it as grand as it is, and and I don't think the XFL should be in direct competition once again with the NFL. They should really just try to be what the AAF was, but be better. And I think they have I think they've you would hope that they would have taken the time to learn from their prior mistakes and see where the AAF also ultimately went wrong, and see how they can see how they can stand out in line with the NFL rather than in competition with the NFL.
I liked the idea of the AAF. Unfortunately, like we said, they couldn't keep it going, which is disappointing. But hopefully the XFL can ultimately do what the AAF couldn't do and just be a stable football league for a couple of years at least.
Considering there's a lot of people out across America that just really can't get enough of football, and the Arena Football League is a kind of a niche thing. It's only in a select few amount of cities across the country, and I think there's definitely a good market for people that want football in the spring, as it was shown in this year with the AAF. But I think if the XFL decides to go kind of the same route, I think they should probably have about the same amount of success viewer-wise. It's just a matter of whether they can pull it all together, really.
Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see until 2020 to see what the XFL is and what it could be. But for now, that's going to do it for us for Bison Information Network. I'm Joe Thompson along with Isak Dinesen. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.